Welcome to the Executive Coaching Podcast, where Executive Coach Alicia Cowan will discuss leadership topics and coaching solutions to tackle the most difficult problems that keep you from leading your team to success.
Hey there, senior leaders. Welcome to episode number 73. I'm Alicia Cowan, your host of the Executive Coaching Podcast. As I'm recording this today, I'll tell you what, I'm feeling really good today. It's Labor Day Monday, and I don't normally record on holidays. However, I'll tell you what, I think I told you the last episode, I went to Chicago on a work trip. I went for Dan Sullivan's strategic coach session, and I think I got sick while I was there. I had a great time, had a great visit, but when I got back, man, I was in it and did not feel great for about a week. But now I'm feeling really good. And so we didn't have a ton planned for this Labor Day weekend. So got a lot of chance of resting, recovering, and now I'm feeling great. So we are ready to rock and roll. And you get me on Labor Day Monday. So this is going to come out mid-September though. So we will be in the midst of getting ready to celebrate my husband's birthday. He actually was born on 9/11. And so we are planning a little special celebration for him. And yeah, we'll be in the midst of getting back into things as normal in September. So I'm excited to talk to you today. Like I said, I have a lot of energy after coming off of being a little under the weather. So I want to talk to you about constraint as an executive presence power move. So, when you think about executive presence, which is a topic I've been on for a while lately, you might imagine sometimes people think that it's somebody that is going to command the room with this like over the top, big personality, big voice, big stature, and a ton of words to fill the room. They're going to say all the right things and fill all the silence. But here's the truth about it. Executive presence is not about being bigger all the time. Executive presence is about being clear. And that's why I'm going to talk about constraint as a true power move. So let's start off by reframing the myth of more is better. So a lot of times people believe that more data, more context, and more talking is equitable to more credibility. And I want to say this, in reality, the opposite often can land a lot stronger. So if you think of an example, you think about that executive that gives like this beautiful 5-minute, crisp, clear summary versus the one that drones on and on and on for like 30 plus minutes. And at the end of it, you're finding yourself thinking, who do I trust more in this situation? Here's the tip. Credibility is not measured by this like word count or the amount of data that you present. Credibility is measured in how clear you are and how confident you come off. All right, so let's talk about the power of constraint. I looked it up in the dictionary. Merriam-Webster says that constraint is defined as the state of being checked, restricted, or compelled to avoid or perform some action. I really like the last statement, like compelled to avoid or perform some action in this particular situation. I want to be clear on this. Fewer words leads to a stronger signal, and clear structure can lead to less noise and more impact. Constraint can signal that self-control, and again, that's confidence that I mentioned. If you allow this room to breathe, it allows others in the room to formulate their own thoughts. And it also gives breathing room to allow somebody else to speak. So if you've ever been in that room, and it happened to me like in the past week or so, where someone speaks and asks a question, and the room almost needs like a second or two or more for everybody to like process what was said, to think about their own thoughts and what they would like to say. And it really takes a second for somebody else to speak. And I was observing this meeting, and somebody would always say, I hate the silence. I'm going to have to speak up. And it was interesting to me just as like a coach to observe this and to watch it all happen. And for someone to feel so uncomfortable in that silence that they had to fill that void. That's what I'm talking about here. And I want to be clear. When I say constraint, what it is not, I'm not talking about keeping yourself muted when you want to say something. Okay, so I do not want this podcast to have the unintended effect of like keeping you quiet or trying to keep you muzzled. That is not what I'm saying here whatsoever. The difference is when we're talking about executive presence, is that when you're speaking, you can make your point in one, two, maybe three sentences. Like you can keep it concise versus oversharing and maybe rambling just to say something to fill the silence. And that's the difference. It's being self-aware enough to note when you're falling into one of these two groups. Okay. So, as an example, I want you to think about maybe how you might have seen this play out in your own workplace. Think about executives or maybe leaders that you've seen speak. Many can be remembered for one very powerful line. They're not remembered for the paragraph that they went on and spoke about. Okay. So here's my coaching tip. If you find yourself wanting to explain something 5 different ways, stop. That can be a signal that you're speaking and trying to overdo it for your own comfort, not for your audience's clarity. Okay. All right. Let's move on and talk about what presence really communicates. Presence is not about how much you know. Okay. I know a lot of times it can feel like the energy of needing to prove oneself or trying to show that you have all the answers. Executive presence is actually the energy of certainty. It doesn't mean that you need to know everything, but when you're speaking, it's being certain in what you're trying to say. So, leaders that radiate this executive presence that I'm talking about, a sentence that they might be using is to say to themselves is that I trust myself enough not to overfill this space. And they also might say to themselves, I trust that if others need clarity on what I'm saying, that they will speak up and ask. Two beautiful thoughts that as you go into presenting that can help you into not trying to fill the void with words. Because here's what happens if you're over explaining and using more words to fill the space, it actually can erode trust. Because what happens is the signals that it might project is sending signals of doubt, sending signals of insecurity, or it can feel like an attempt to prove worth. So here is my coaching tip for you. If you find yourself in this situation, and you start to stack words on top of each other, you've got to pause in that moment and ask yourself, am I in this convincing energy? And if I am, who am I trying to convince right now? Am I trying to convince them? Am I trying to convince myself? Like basically, who am I trying to talk into believing this thought right now? And that can help you enough to pause in that moment and reconsider your next step and how you want to approach it. All right. So, I want to talk through some tools. As you know, I like to do in this podcast, I'd like to give you very practical, tangible, tactical tools to take away that you can practice right away. So, let's dive in tools and practices for constraint. So, the first tip and trick I want to give you is pre meeting constraint planning. So, what you can do is if you're headed into a meeting, go into it simply by asking yourself, what is the one thing that I want them to remember? And then what you can do is anchor everything else around that one thing. Your supporting facts, your deck, if you have one, your agenda, everything that you have can be anchored around the one thing that I want them to remember. And you may try to find yourself adding different things into this. Keep it simple. What is the one thing? Doesn't mean you can't say more than one thing. It just means that it's anchored to the one point. What is the one thing I want them to walk away remembering? It can help you get really clear as you're headed in to a meeting. Okay, so that's a way you can prep yourself. Another rule that you could use is the three-sentence rule. This is a tip and trick that's really helpful to get clarity so you can deliver your point in three sentences or less. So here's the framework that I have for you. If you want to make a point, you want to keep it to these three sentences, you can start by saying, number one, what is my main point? And I'm going to state your message super clearly. So in this example, you could say, our top priority this quarter is customer retention. Okay, just using an example. So there's your main point. What's the situation here? Number two is the why it really matters. So what you want to do here is connect it to the bigger picture. So using the same example, retention drives our profitability more than new acquisition. Okay. Why does it matter? Third, you want to talk about the impact. You want to anchor this with what is going to happen. What is the outcome, the consequence, etc. So keeping with the same example, if we get this right, we'll hit our growth goals without adding more headcount. Keep it that simple. And then you stop, you let it land, and if they want more, they will ask. All right. So next I want to talk about restraint and how do you coach yourself through it? So number one is you want to be self-aware. You want to notice your impulses. And if you have that impulse to over explain. Again, you'll know it when you find yourself with that like urgent sense of energy where you like find yourself almost like leaning in and leaning forward and trying to be in this convincing space. So just notice it when you feel the need to over explain. In that situation, what you want to do instead is just pause, breathe, allow for silence, no matter how uncomfortable it is, and remind yourself the silence often lands louder than more words. And if someone isn't clear in the situation on their end, it's okay for them to ask questions and to allow them to come to that conclusion rather than you trying to go into convincing mode. All right. Last couple tips I want to give you are some constraint rules that you can follow in writing. So we talked a lot about meetings, but this constraint and executive presence can also be used in your writing. One place that I see this a lot is in emails. Sometimes people want to try to cram so much information into an email, but what you want to do is, again, keep things really simple and streamlined and straightforward. An email should typically be able to fit within one screen, meaning like when you scroll in your email and you have those emails that are like a couple screens long where they just like keep going and going and going. Those typically mean that we should have had a phone call or a meeting when there's emails that are just way too long. So a good rule of thumb is to keep your emails to one screen with one key takeaway. Okay, same premise that we were talking about the meeting. How do you keep it just to one point? The next is presentations. One rule, again, that can be a best practice is to think about when you're making a deck as one message needs to be communicated and conveyed per slide in your deck. Again, if you need extra information to communicate, it's okay to either add the slides or to pause and ask people if they have questions. But when you go into a presentation and there's somebody with this like crazy busy slide where it's got a ton of information on it, it's like paragraphs and paragraphs long, and everybody finds themselves reading it, and then the person's like talking over it, and you're like, nobody's really like fully understanding what the actual takeaway is meant to be. You don't want that to happen. So keep it simple. One message per slide when you can get away with it. Even if you have a bunch of data that you're presenting the one message by saying, okay, this is a lot of data. What I want you to take away or what the action from this is, or what the main point of this is this. Be clear. One message per slide. Rule of thumb here again, the tip is don't let volume end up being a crutch for you. Okay. The more information does not equate to the better presentation or the clarity. Okay. Don't let volume be a crutch. All right, so let me give you and close with a real world executive example. So I'm going to share an anonymized coaching story. I had a leader that came to me for help with this. They had a massive multiple company project that they were working on. They were the head of this like family of companies. They were in the technical space and they were having to bring all of these different companies together with again, a project that was going to affect every single company. And they had to provide regular updates to the executive boards and C-suite leaders from all these different companies. So when we came to this coaching session, there was a situation where there was just so much information that was being provided. It was very technical, and we were trying to figure out how do we speak to the people that are not with these technical backgrounds. We need to understand it in layman's terms so that everybody's on the same page and clear. And if decisions need to be made, if we need to move work forward, there's clarity amongst the group about what is being communicated. So this is the exact practice that we did. We went through and we tried to take very complex information and summarize it. How do we make it clear for one slide? What is the main point that they should be taking away? How do you say it in words that people will understand and they understand the impact and they understand what is being asked of them rather than like trying to like present a ton of information that they don't get and they don't understand. So we went through this practice. And after going through this practice of executive presence and constraints, their updates that were like 20, 30 minutes long got down to 5 minutes. And then it allowed for like very rich conversation to happen afterwards. And the dialogue that happened really helped move the project forward. And as a result, their influence completely skyrocketed. They had such impact that they became the lead on this project rather than just being someone that was executing some of the work. So that's the power that this work can have. So, constraint. When we talk about executive presence and constraint, it's not just about being quiet or being efficient and getting through things faster. It's about executive presence. And in the example that I gave, this leader, they owned the room rather than just being looked at as like a technical expert that had all this complexity that they were able to talk about. They owned the room and because they were able to take this complex information and explain it in a way that everybody was able to understand. So they really looked like a leader. And because of that, it came off as they were highly confident, highly confident, and very intelligent because they could speak and live in both worlds. That is the power the constraint can have. So, again, do not get it twisted. This is not about staying quiet, it's about being clear. All right, so I'm going to leave you with this. For your next meeting, I want to give you a challenge. Just write down your core message on a sticky note. Everybody's got like little sticky pads floating around their desk. And so use that as your tool. It's one line. That's your anchor for that meeting. That's your anchor for that message. It's the thing that you'll stick to and that you're going to come back to as the main point. You're not going to say a million words about it or dress it up in 12 different ways. You're going to stay clear and concise around this one point that's on that sticky note. Okay? I want you to try it and watch how much more weight your words can carry. Okay. All right, friends, I appreciate you listening. And in the spirit of conciseness and constraint, I just want to leave you with executive presence is not about filling the air and being, uncomfortable with silence and, trying to fill the void. It's about shaping it. And so, constraint, that is actually your power move. And like I said, I have clients that I've helped with this exact thing. If you need some help with this, do not hesitate. Reach out. I will tell you all about it. If you're being challenged with this or anything else, I can help you. Reach out to me on my website. It's aliciacowencoaching.com. It's ELISIAKEOWN coaching.com. And I will be happy to talk to you. Thank you so much for listening, and we will see you next time. Bye.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Executive Coaching Podcast with Alicia Cowan. If you're ready to have an executive coach who's ready to help you lead your team to success, then book an introductory call at aliciacowancoaching.com/call.